By the time the sheriff pried the last brick from the parlor wall of the Monroe house, the hand that fell out was nothing but bone and yellowed nails, still frozen in a clawing reach toward the thin crack where the light had once come through. The townspeople outside said they could smell the truth before they saw it, a sweet, rotted scent that curled down the back of the throat like old cough syrup and grave dirt. Inside that hidden cavity, half a room wide and coffin tight, was the shriveled husk of Elias Monroe, the most God-fearing man in all of Hollow Creek, folded into himself like something that had tried for too long not to die. For almost a year, his two elder daughters had pushed food and water through a gap no wider than a man's thumb, keeping him half alive and wholly damned. Folks said their crime began the day they sealed him in. They were wrong. It began long before the first brick was laid, on a winter night when the Reverend Elias Monroe came home with blood on his collar and scripture on his tongue. Hollow Creek, Arkansas, in 1880 was the kind of place where dust and secrets settled in the same corners. A single muddy street, a church with a steeple that leaned a little to the left, a general store that smelled of tobacco and molasses, and a scattering of farmhouses that hunched against the wind like tired men. The Monroe house was the grandest of these, a two-story clapboard structure with black shutters and a porch that wrapped around like a warning finger. It sat a little apart from the rest, up on a small rise, where its windows could look down on the town and the town could look up in reluctant respect. Elias Monroe had built it with money made on other men's sins. He was not just the reverend on Sundays. He was a farmer, a lender, and a man whose opinion could bend a person's future. His word in the pulpit was law, his word in the tavern carried interest. He had a way of making men feel small and grateful at the same time. They came to him with their debts, their sick children, their doubts about salvation, and he would press a heavy hand on their shoulders and promise to intercede with God, so long as their tithes did not falter. At home, the hand that blessed in public beat in private. His wife Anna had died 5 years before, on a hot July day when the locusts screamed so loud they drowned out her last breaths. The doctor said fever. The neighbors whispered other explanations. Since then, the Monroe house had been run by his three daughters, Lydia, the eldest at 27, who wore responsibility like a second skin, Cora, 2 years younger with a soft voice and sharp eyes, and little Mary, barely 16, who still laughed sometimes when she thought her father wasn't listening. They were known in town as the Monroe sisters, and the men at the general store spoke of them with the same wary admiration they gave their father. The girls never lingered in town. They came, got what they needed, and went back up the road, long skirts brushing the dust, heads bent to one another in private conversation. If anyone noticed the shadows under their eyes, they didn't mention it. The night everything started to unravel, the wind had a knife's edge to it. It was early January 1880, the kind of cold that crept into bone and board, making houses groan like old ships. The Reverend had been at a funeral that afternoon, preaching over a boy who drowned in the river. He came home late, the clock in the parlor already chiming 9, his black coat dusted with ice crystals, his Bible tucked under one arm like a weapon. Lydia met him at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. The smell of stew and cornbread hung heavy in the hall. "You're late, Papa," she said, trying to keep her voice even. Elias brushed past her, cold air gusting in with him. "The work of the Lord does not run on your kitchen clock, girl." His boots thudded down the hallway to the dining room. Cora and Mary were already seated at the table, bowls steaming in front of them, hands folded in their laps. They stood as he entered. It was an old habit drilled in like catechism. "Sit," he commanded, tossing his hat onto the sideboard. He sank heavily into his chair at the head of the table, the wood creaking in protest. Lydia moved to ladle stew into his bowl, her hands practiced and quick. He grabbed her wrist. His fingers were icy, digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. Lydia's eyes snapped to his face. There was a smear of something on his collar, dark against the starched white. At first she thought it was mud. Then the smell hit her, iron and something sour. "What happened?" she whispered. Elias released her and picked up his spoon, ignoring the question. He bowed his head. "Lord, bless this bounty before us, the fruit of honest hands, and keep this house from wickedness and rebellion. Amen. Amen." the girls echoed, some more shakily than others. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons and the occasional shudder of the house in the wind. Lydia's mind raced. She watched the red smear on his collar with a growing knot of dread. The funeral had been for a boy, yes, but there'd been talk in town, whispers of a girl gone missing from a farmstead a few miles out. A girl who had come to Reverend Monroe for counsel a few times, Lydia remembered. Pretty, quiet, desperate. Papa, Cora ventured softly, did the funeral go long? He looked up slow, as if wading out of thick thoughts. His eyes, usually a flinty gray, seemed almost black in the dim lamplight. The funeral went exactly as long as the Lord required, he said. Longer than that boy deserved, some might say, seeing as he took his own life in rebellion against God. Mary swallowed. But Papa, folks said he slipped. Folks say many things, Elias snapped. His spoon rattled against the bowl. They gossip. They judge. The only judgment that matters is the Lord's, spoken through his servants. His gaze landed on Lydia, heavy and unblinking. And through the men he places at the head of their households. Lydia dropped her eyes. She could feel the familiar heat rising in her chest, a mix of anger and fear. Since Anna's death, that look from her father had been followed, more times than she cared to count, by a hand across the face or a strap on the back. Or worse, the long, cold silences that felt like being shut out from God himself. Dinner ended. Lydia and Cora cleared the table. Mary washed the dishes at the pump sink, the water so cold it turned her knuckles red. Elias went to the parlor, where the big walnut desk sat beneath the stern portrait of his own father, the first Reverend Monroe. Lydia could hear him there, the scratch of his pen, the low murmur of scripture as he prepared Sunday's sermon. The house settled into its nighttime rhythms. Upstairs, the wind whistled at the window panes like a trapped thing. It was nearly midnight when the scream tore through the house. Lydia was in her small room mending a slip by candlelight. Cora was already in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. Mary had gone to the attic earlier, giggling about finding her old diary. The scream was Mary's. It started high and cut off sharp, like something snatched it out of her throat. The needle fell from Lydia's hand. She was on her feet and at the door before the fabric hit the floor. Cora was right behind her. They met in the hallway with wide eyes, skirts whispering against the boards as they ran toward the attic stairs. "Mary," Lydia called, heart pounding. "Mary, answer me." Another sound floated down, the unmistakable boom of their father's voice, roaring in anger. "Wickedness under my roof," he bellowed. "Whoredom in my own house." The attic door was half open. Lydia shoved it wide. The attic was a low, shadowed space, full of old trunks and forgotten furniture covered in sheets. A single oil lamp burned on a crate, its small flame throwing long, quivering shadows. In the far corner by the little dormer window, Mary was on the floor, her dress torn at the shoulder, hair tumbled around her face. Elias stood over her, one hand wrapped in her hair, the other gripping his Bible so tight his knuckles were white. Lydia froze. "Papa," Cora started. Elias swung his head toward them. His face was a mask of fury, twisted and almost unrecognizable. "You see." He spat, dragging Mary up by the hair. She whimpered, clutching at his wrist. "I find your sister here, hidden away with filth." He gestured with his Bible toward a crumpled scrap of paper on the floor. Lydia knew, without having to pick it up, that it was not filth at all. It would be Mary's diary, pages filled with girlish fantasies and complaints, and yes, probably questions. Questions about God, about boys, about a world that offered little but marriage or servitude. "She writes lust," Elias snarled. "She dreams rebellion under my roof, after all I do to keep this house pure." "Papa, I wasn't," Mary sobbed, tears streaking her face. It was just words, I swear, you swear." Elias shoved her, she stumbled, striking her back against an old trunk. "You dare take God's holy name into your lying mouth." He raised his hand. Lydia moved without thinking. She stepped between him and Mary, arms outstretched. "Don't," she said. Her voice surprised even her, low, flat, dangerous. "Don't touch her again." The attic seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind went still. Elias blinked down at her. For a moment something like disbelief flickered in his eyes. Then the disbelief curdled into something uglier. "You forget yourself, girl," he growled. "You think you stand on level ground with me." His hand came down, open-palmed and hard. It cracked against Lydia's cheek, snapping her head to the side. She staggered, tasting blood, but she did not move away. "I said," she whispered, "don't touch her again." "Lydia, please," Cora begged, grabbing at her sleeve. "Please, we must accept his discipline," Elias intoned, raising his voice as if addressing a congregation. "You test me, all of you. Anna's blood is barely cold, and you test me day and night with your whining and your willfulness." "Anna is cold," Lydia shot back, "because you kept her in this house when she was sick. Because you said faith would heal what a doctor could not." Her father's face went blank. "What did you say?" His voice dropped, quiet and lethal. Cora's fingers dug into Lydia's arm. "Lydia, stop." But Lydia's dam had broken. Years of fear and resentment, of watching her mother fade and her sisters flinch, poured out of her in a flood. "You did that," she said. "You let her die. You let her die so you could tell people God's will had been done. So you could preach about loss while they patted your hand and filled your plate." The Reverend's breathing grew ragged. "You wicked, ungrateful child. I took you into my arms when you were born. I fed you, clothed you, taught you the fear of the Lord. You taught us the fear of you," Cora whispered. Tears shone in her eyes. Elias turned on her. "Even you, Cora, my obedient one. You turn against me too." Mary, still huddled by the trunk, sobbed into her hands. "Please, Papa, please don't be angry." "What I am is disappointed," he hissed. "I failed you. I let Satan sow rebellion in your hearts, but no more." He moved fast for a man of his size and age. One moment he was glaring, the next he had crossed the small attic space and shoved Lydia aside, his hand reaching for Mary again. Something in Lydia snapped. Later, she would not remember making the decision. She would remember the smell of lamp oil and dust, the way Cora's sleeve slipped from her grasp as she lunged, the way the attic seemed to tilt. She grabbed her father's arm just as he hauled Mary upright. Her fingers dug into the flesh of his forearm. "Let her go," she said. He wrenched toward her, bringing his full weight around. The two of them collided. The lamp on the crate tipped, flame flaring. It rolled, clattering across the floorboards, trailing a thin line of oil. Elias lost his footing on the slick. His boots skidded. With a grunt of surprise more than pain, he stumbled backward, one arm pinwheeling for balance. His shoulder hit the low support beam. His head snapped back into the sloped attic wall. The sound of it, a dull, sickening thud, seemed to echo from the rafters. He crumpled to the floor. For a heartbeat, the three sisters stared. The only sound was Mary's ragged breathing and the sizzle of the lamp flame guttering out on the damp boards. "Papa," Cora whispered. Elias did not move. Lydia's own breathing roared in her ears. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering over his chest. "Papa," she tried louder. She patted his cheek. No response. His eyes stared, half-lidded, at the roof beams. A trickle of blood ran from behind his right ear, dark against his graying hair. Mary made a sound like a wounded animal. "You killed him," she gasped. "Lydia, you killed him." "No." Lydia pressed trembling fingers to his throat. There, a faint flutter, weak but present. "He's alive." "He's alive." Cora let out a shaking breath. "We have to fetch Dr. Phelps." "And tell him what?" Lydia snapped, looking up. Her cheek was swelling, an angry red splotch spreading toward her eye. "Tell him our Holy Father slipped in the attic while beating his daughters." Cora swallowed. She knew what that would mean. The Reverend's reputation was bulletproof in Hollow Creek. The sisters', by contrast, was made of spun glass. Three unmarried women accusing the town's spiritual leader of brutality would be laughed out of the doctor's parlor at best. At worst, they'd be labeled hysterical, wicked, possessed. Mary might be sent away. They might be sent away. "What do we do?" Cora whispered. Downstairs, the old grandfather clock began to toll midnight. Lydia looked at her father, at the man who had held their lives in his fists for so long. At the bruises on Mary's wrists, the scar on Cora's back from a beating last summer, the phantom ache in her own shoulders. "We get him downstairs," she said slowly. We see how bad it is, and we think." It took all three of them and an awful lot of grunting to haul Elias' limp body down the narrow staircase and into the hallway. Twice his head bumped the railing, eliciting a low moan. Lydia flinched each time, half in guilt, half in relief. Alive. He was alive. They laid him on the parlor floor, on the faded rug with the oriental pattern Anna had loved. The fire in the mantel had burned down to a low glow. Shadows crawled on the walls like uneasy thoughts. "Water," Lydia panted. "Cora, get water. Mary, fetch clean rags." Cora ran to the kitchen, Mary to the linen chest. Lydia knelt again by her father, dabbing at the blood at his temple with the corner of her apron. His eyelids fluttered, but he did not wake. Her mind raced. If he came to, he would be angrier than he had ever been. His rage had always been a storm contained by scripture. Now it would be something else, something elemental. He would see her defiance not as one moment in a lifetime of abuse, but as rebellion against the structure he believed God himself had ordained. He would ruin them. Cora returned with a basin. Lydia dipped a rag, wiped away more blood. She looked around the parlor, eyes landing on the far wall. It was the outside wall, the one that backed up to the unused pantry, a narrow, windowless room off the kitchen that they mostly used for storing tools and junk. The house was old. The walls were thick, brick under plaster. A thought slid into her mind, quiet and horrible. Lydia, Cora knelt beside her. Maybe we can send for Dr. Phelps in the morning. Say he fell on the porch. People slip on ice all the time. If he wakes before then, you can tell him he fainted. Lydia stared at her sister, at Cora's earnest face streaked with attic dust and fear, at Mary hovering in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself like a child. What if, Lydia said, her voice thin, we didn't give him the chance? Cora frowned. What if this is our chance? Lydia whispered, leaning closer so Mary wouldn't hear. What if God has put him in our hands just this once? For once he is the weak one, the helpless one. Cora recoiled slightly. Lydia, no. You're not talking sense. We're not can't what? Lydia snapped. Protect ourselves, protect Mary. How many more nights like tonight do you think there'll be before one of us doesn't get up again, before it's not an accident? You saw his eyes, Cora. He wasn't going to stop. Cora looked at their father, the man who had rocked her as a baby, the man who had beaten her with a belt when she was 12 for dropping a hymnal, the man who had stood at the pulpit and thundered about love while ignoring the bruises he left on his daughter's arms. He's still our father, she said weakly. And Mama was still his wife, Lydia replied. That didn't stop him from letting her die. The words sat between them, ugly and true. From the doorway, Mary whispered, What are you saying? Lydia's gaze flicked to her youngest sister. Mary's eyes were wide and wet, her lower lip trembling. I'm saying, Lydia said slowly, that if he never walks back into that church, if he never leaves this house again, people will say God called him home. They won't blame us. They'll bring casseroles and pies. They'll put their hands on our shoulders at the funeral and tell us we're brave, and we will be safe. The clock ticked. The fire hissed softly. Cora's hands twisted in her skirt. You mean to kill him? Lydia closed her eyes. For a second she saw herself as the town might. A stern woman with her father's eyes cold as the river in winter plotting patricide. But beneath that image, deeper and older, she felt something else, an iron rod of resolve that had been forged in years of desperation. No, she said. I mean to let him die. There's a difference. Mary made a strangled sound. We can't. We'll go to hell. We've been living in hell, Lydia murmured. Silence again, thick and suffocating. When Cora spoke, her voice was so soft Lydia almost didn't hear it. How? She asked. Lydia looked toward the pantry wall again, calculating. The house's layout unfolded in her mind. The pantry abutted this parlor. It had only one door from the kitchen. It had no windows. Its walls were thick enough that a man could shout himself hoarse and no one in the yard would hear, especially with the wind. We put him in the pantry, she said. We make it, we change it. Brick it off from this side. Make a false wall. From the kitchen it'll still be a pantry. From here, it will be his room, Cora finished, horror dawning. His cell, Lydia whispered. He cannot beat us if he cannot reach us. He cannot preach hellfire if no one hears him. Mary stepped into the parlor, shaking her head. We're not jailers, we're not that. Lydia, please. Lydia stood. For a moment she swayed, the magnitude of what she was proposing nearly buckling her knees. Then she set her jaw. Mary, go upstairs, she said. Go to your room, close the door, don't come out until morning. No, Mary's voice cracked. If you're going to do something, I don't want you to do it alone. I don't want to leave you. You won't be leaving me, Lydia said. You'll be saving yourself. Cora rose too. Lydia, this is madness. And staying is sanity. Lydia rounded on her, the red mark on her cheek livid. Do you think he'll stop with slaps, Cora? When Mary's of marrying age, do you think he won't trade her to some old deacon to settle a debt? Do you think he won't beat us for every tear we shed at the thought? Cora flinched. She knew their father's bargaining eye too well. If we send for the doctor, Lydia went on, and he recovers, we are lost, all of us. You know that. Cora did know. In her heart, in the places she had tried not to look at too closely, she had always known their options were narrowing, year by year, beating by beating. He is still alive, she whispered. He will know, in there, he will know what we've done. Yes, Lydia said quietly. For once he will live with fear. That more than anything tipped the scales. They did not decide with a handshake or a vow. They decided by not stopping, by lifting his arms, by dragging him again down another hallway, this time to the pantry off the kitchen. The pantry was a simple room. Shelves along one wall, a work table with old tools, a dirt floor that went damp in heavy rain. Lydia grabbed the lamp, its flame low but steady. The light made their father's face look waxy and unreal as they maneuvered him inside, propping him against the far wall. Cora stood in the doorway, shaking her head minutely. "We can still change our minds," she said. "We can still." Lydia stepped around her, her body a barrier. "Mary," she said over her shoulder, voice firm. "Go upstairs, now." Mary backed away, tears spilling freely now. She turned and fled, her footsteps light and frantic on the stairs. Lydia took one last look at her father. His chest rose and fell shallowly. His lips moved, forming half-words. A smear of blood stained his hairline. He looked smaller now, not the towering figure in the pulpit, but a tired, aging man broken on his own attic beam. "Forgive me," Lydia whispered. She closed the pantry door. The Monroe house did not sleep that night. While the wind howled outside, covering any stray noises, Lydia and Cora raided the old barn for bricks salvaged from a collapsed smokehouse. They carried them, two at a time, into the parlor, stacking them against the pantry wall. The mortar was rough. They had no mason's skill, only desperation and a bucket of thick, gray mix Lydia had hurriedly stirred from the last of the lime and sand. With each brick laid, the house changed. They worked in shifts, one laying, one fetching. Their arms ached, their backs screamed. Once midway through, a low moan came from the other side of the wall. "Lydia?" The voice was muzzy, confused. "Girls, what's this?" Lydia's trowel paused in midair. Cora froze, a brick slipping from her hands and thudding to the rug. "Papa," Lydia answered, forcing her voice flat, unremarkable. "You fell, you hit your head, you're in the pantry, you need rest." A weak laugh wheezed through the boards. "You foolish child. Let me out of here. Now, this is no place for me. I am not some sack of potatoes." Cora's eyes met Lydia's. They were wide and full of mute pleading. Lydia turned back to the half-built wall. "You'll be safe there," she said. "No stairs, nobody to disturb you." There was a pause, then a strange, soft thump against the other side, as of a hand testing the space. "Lydia." His voice was clearer now, a warning edge creeping in. "Open this door. I will forgive your foolishness, but you must open this door." Cora's breath hitched. Lydia could see her hands falter, the brick in her grip turning slick with sweat. "If we open it," Lydia said, laying another brick, "we will never be forgiven, not truly. We will live the rest of our lives waiting for your hand to fall." "Do you know what you're doing?" he wheezed. Lydia's jaw clenched. "Yes." The knocking started then, weak but insistent. It rattled the boards and their resolve. Cora flinched with every thud. Tears streaked her face, leaving clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Finally, she whispered, maybe we don't brick it all the way. Maybe we just put something heavy, a wardrobe, a chain. We don't have to." "He'll break it," Lydia said. "Or someone will, someday. This has to be final." By dawn, the wall was done. From the parlor, it looked like nothing more than an odd, slightly protruding section of plaster. Unpainted, the mortar still damp and a little uneven, but part of the room now. Lydia had left one small thing, a gap along the floor, no wider than 2 fingers, just where this new wall met the baseboard. She told herself it was practical. He would need something. Air, perhaps. A way for sound to pass. She did not examine the kindness too closely. It sat ill with the rest of what they had done. The knocking had grown fainter as the night wore on. Now, as pink seeped into the sky outside, there was only one sound, a slow, dragging breath on the other side. Lydia and Cora stood, swaying with exhaustion, side by side before their new construction. Their hands were raw. Cora's hair had come loose, hanging in wild strands. Lydia's dress was streaked with mortar and blood, not all of it her own. "We have to go about things as normal," Lydia said hoarsely. "Mary will wake soon. She cannot see this. Not yet. We'll tell her he left before dawn." Called away to help some soul. He does that sometimes. Nobody will question it. Cora stared at the wall. And if he calls, if he shouts our names, Lydia looked down at the tiny crack. Then we remember why we did this, she said, and we don't answer. For 2 days they didn't. Elias Monroe did not shout, not at first. On the morning after his imprisonment, there were confused questions murmured through the wall. Lydia, Cora, girls, a soft "where am I?" A weak "open this door." Then silence, too much silence. On the 3rd day, Lydia broke her own rule. She waited until Mary went into town with Mrs. Haggerty next door, helping to carry bundles. She waited until Cora was outside splitting kindling with jerky, angry chops. Then she took a tin plate from the cupboard, a small cup of water, and half a loaf of bread. She knelt by the wall, heart hammering in her throat. "Papa," she whispered into the crack. "Are you there?" There was a long pause. Long enough that she almost convinced herself there would be no answer. Then a rasp so faint she had to press her ear to the baseboard. "Lydia." It was him, raw and hoarse and thin, but him. She swallowed. I brought you bread and water." She slid the plate toward the gap. It caught too high. She cursed it under her breath, angling it, trying again. This time the crust of the bread just fit, scraping along the wood as she pushed it through. For a second there was nothing. Then something small and dry brushed her fingertip, a hand, or the tips of his fingers at least, searching. The plate moved, tugged away into darkness. "You intend to keep me alive, then," he rasped. "For now," Lydia said. "Is this punishment?" A wet sound as he swallowed. "Is that it? Lock me away like some criminal, like some beast?" Lydia stared at the wall until the pattern of imperfect mortar swam. "You aren't stupid, Papa." A weak chuckle filtered through. It curdled into a cough. "Your mother always said you had too sharp a tongue, too much spirit. I see she was right." "Leave Mama out of this," Lydia snapped, then bit her lip. "She is already out of it," he said softly. "You made sure of that, didn't you? You and your doubts, your blame." The words slid into her like knives. "How did he always know where to cut?" "Eat," she said. "You'll need your strength." "For what?" he whispered. "To count the days until you forget me." But she didn't forget. Days turned into weeks in a slow, grinding pattern. From the outside, the Monroe house looked like any other morning home. Lydia went to the general store, telling Mr. Phelps the younger, Dr. Phelps's son, who ran the place now, that her father had been called to Little Rock to sit on some ecclesiastical council. Cora kept the farm ledger, eyes skittering away from the page that had always been Elias' domain. Mary moved around the house like a restless ghost, her laughter gone, her eyes hollow. They all lied. At mealtimes, Lydia would set aside a smaller plate carried discreetly into the parlor when Mary's back was turned. Sometimes Cora would do it instead, her steps hesitant. They would kneel by the crack, sliding in stale bread, a chunk of potato, a ladle of thin soup. Sometimes a hand would be waiting. Sometimes nothing. The conversations through the wall changed, too. At first, Elias pleaded. He spoke of misunderstandings, of heat and temper, of human weakness. He painted pictures of a future in which they opened the wall. He forgave them. There were tears and prayers and a new beginning. Then when that did not move them, he turned to Scripture. "Honor thy father and thy mother," he would recite, his voice like sand, "that thy days may be long in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." Cora would flinch, guilt twisting in her gut. Lydia would stare straight ahead, jaw clenched. After Scripture came curses. "You think you are free of me," he hissed one night when Lydia slid his supper through. "You think this wall will keep my judgment out? You cannot brick in what I have already placed in your hearts. Every man you look at will see me in you. Every whisper in town will be my voice, calling you what you are: murderers, Jezebels, vipers in the bosom of this community." Lydia did not answer. She pressed her palm against the plaster for a moment, feeling nothing but its cool, unyielding surface, then stood and walked away. Winter deepened. Snow came, rare for Hollow Creek, blanketing the fields in a quiet, deceptive purity. Smoke from the Monroe house chimney curled into the white sky like a question mark. Mary grew more and more withdrawn. She woke screaming some nights, clutching at her throat, babbling about low voices in the walls. Once, Lydia found her sitting in the parlor just before dawn, staring at the new wall, her hands clamped over her ears. "He's praying," Mary whispered. "He's praying loud, but the words sound wrong. Like he's swallowing them backward." Lydia put a hand on her shoulder. "Go back to bed." "You can't keep him in there forever," Mary said. "It's not right. It wasn't right what he did, Lydia snapped, harsher than she intended. Mary flinched. I know, but this is something else. Lydia softened, squeezing her sister gently. Go back to bed, she repeated. We'll sort things when the thaw comes. She told herself privately that they would revisit their choice in the spring. That maybe then, with the river running and the fields greening, she would have the courage to do something else. Admit what they had done. Move away. Let the town judge. But the thaw did not bring clarity, it brought rot. The first time the smell seeped through, it was subtle. A faint sourness in the parlor, easily blamed on forgotten scraps or damp wood. Lydia scrubbed the baseboards, mopped the floor, threw open the windows. The cold air eased it for a while. Then one afternoon, as the three sisters folded laundry in the sitting room, Mary wrinkled her nose. "What is that?" she asked. Cora froze, linen sheet trembling in her hands. Lydia swallowed. "Perhaps a mouse died in the walls," she said lightly. "It happens." Mary gave her a look that said she did not believe in phantom mice. That night, when Mary had finally cried herself to sleep, Lydia crept down to the parlor alone. The smell was stronger there. It seemed to coil out from that patch of wall like invisible smoke, wrapping around her face, sinking into her clothes. She knelt by the crack. "Papa," she whispered. "Papa, answer me." Silence. "Are you there?" The words sounded foolish, hanging in the thick air. Of course he was there. Where else would he go? And yet, her heart pounding, she slid a crust of bread through the gap. It went in smoothly, no resistance. No brush of fingers, nothing. She waited, counting her breaths. 30, 50, 100. The only sounds were the tick of the mantel clock and the faint scraping of tree branches against the window outside. "Papa," she said again. From deep within there came a sound. It took her a moment to place it. Not words, not even a moan, just a sigh, long and low like air leaving a bellows. Then nothing. The next afternoon, Cora came in from the yard, cheeks flushed, apron muddy. "We can't keep doing this," she burst out, not bothering with preamble. "The smell, Liddy, the Haggertys can smell it from their porch. Mrs. Haggerty asked Mary this morning if a raccoon died under our floorboards. We have to do something." Lydia was wiping down the kitchen table, her hands stilled. "So what do you suggest?" she asked. "We knock down the wall and drag out what's left in front of the whole town. We stand there while they measure us for the gallows." Cora's face crumpled. We could say he locked himself in, that he took ill, that he lost his mind. You know he's been strange these last years, even they see it. They might show mercy." Lydia let out a short, bitter laugh. "They might lock us up alongside him, or worse. Cora, open your eyes. The law is his. The church is his. Even dead, he holds all the cards." Cora slammed her fist on the table, making the saltcellar jump. "So what then? We sit here and rot with him. We let that smell seep into our walls and our skin and our lungs until we can't breathe without tasting him." A small voice spoke from the doorway. "He's quiet now," Mary said. She stood there, hair unbraided, eyes enormous in her thin face. I put my ear to the wall last night. I couldn't help it. It was like it was calling me, like it was humming, but there was nothing, no words, no breathing, just still." Cora covered her mouth, eyes filling. "Oh, God!" Lydia closed hers. Part of her had known the moment the smell came that this was inevitable. The human body, denied light and air, did not keep. Even with the miserable food they pushed through that slot, even with their half-hearted kindness. "He's gone," Mary whispered. "And we're still here." They didn't speak of it after that, not in front of one another, but the wall became the axis the house spun around. They cleaned more, scrubbed harder, burned herbs in little bundles. Sage, rosemary, anything Ma Haggerty would sell them cheaply. The smell never quite left. It lived in the corners, in the curtains, in the fibers of their dresses. Word began to creep through town. At first it was idle curiosity. "Funny we ain't seen Reverend Monroe," old Mr. Dooley remarked on the church steps. "Man of God like that, you'd think he'd have shown his face Easter Sunday." Lydia spun lies with practiced ease. A lingering illness, a calling to minister to distant souls, a temporary sabbatical, but lies are tender. It only takes one spark. In July, that spark came in the form of a broken water pump. The Haggerty's pump gave out one sweltering afternoon. With Mr. Haggerty laid up with a bad back, it fell to their eldest boy, Tom, to go around asking neighbors if he could draw from theirs. He was 16, lanky, with straw-colored hair and a curiosity that tended to get him into trouble. He came to the Monroe house just as Lydia was in town haggling for flour. Mary was hanging laundry in the back, humming under her breath. Cora was in the front room, mending a tear in the settee. Tom knocked. Cora, flustered by the sudden male presence at their door, wiped her hands and opened it. "Miss Cora," Tom said, touching the brim of his cap. "Ma wondered if we might use your pump till Pa gets ours fixed." "Yes, of course," Cora said, relieved it was only that. "Tell your mother she's welcome." Tom nodded, lingered. His eyes flicked past her into the dim hallway. "Reckon Reverend Monroe wouldn't mind." Cora's hand tightened on the doorframe. "My father is not at home." Tom grinned, a little too bold. "Seems he's not been at home quite a bit this year." Heat crept up Cora's neck. He's away on church business, Tom. Run along now." She closed the door firmly. Tom, left on the porch, rocked on his heels, gaze drifting to the upstairs windows. None of the curtains moved. A vulture circled lazily over the fields. He shrugged and went around back. The Monroe pump stood near the kitchen doorway. As Tom worked the handle, filling his buckets, the back door, left ajar for air, creaked a little wider. The sound that slipped out was brief, almost nothing. A tiny clatter like a plate against wood, maybe, or the scuttle of something over a floor. Tom paused. He was a boy accustomed to the familiar noises of old farmhouses, but something in that sound pricked his ears. He set the buckets down quietly and stepped closer, peering through the crack. The kitchen was empty. Sunlight slanted in through the small window over the sink, illuminating dust motes in the air. A kettle sat on the stove, not yet boiling. A loaf of bread cooled on the counter, its crust still gleaming with egg wash. And from somewhere deeper in the house, faint but distinct, came another noise. A wet plop, then a slow scrape. "Miss Cora," Tom called tentatively. No answer. He stepped over the threshold. The smell hit him first, thick, cloying, wrong. Not just the usual kitchen odors of onion and fat. Something sweet and rotten, like a forgotten carcass in high summer. He gagged. "Hello?" he tried again, voice muffled behind his hand. The sound came again, scrape, plop. It drew him forward down the short hall toward the parlor. Each step made the floorboards creak. His breath sounded too loud in his own ears. At the parlor doorway, he hesitated. He knew, somewhere in the part of his brain that still listened to his mother's warnings, that going into another family's front room uninvited was a bad idea. But the smell was stronger now, almost a physical thing. It seemed to push him. He took one more step. The parlor looked normal at first glance. Sofa, chair, fireplace. A crocheted doily on the little table by the window. Sunlight through drawn curtains. Then his gaze fell on the far wall. On the floor, against the baseboard, was a plate. Tin plate just like the ones he and his brothers used in the fields. It was shoved up against the wall, half tucked under an odd, faintly discolored section of plaster. A stale crust of bread sat on it, crawling with ants. As Tom stared, something black and sticky dripped down from the crack between wall and floor onto the edge of the plate. It wasn't much, just a slow, viscous bead glistening darkly in the dim light. Tom's stomach flipped. He stumbled backward, hand flying to his mouth. "Tom." Cora's voice snapped behind him like a whip. He swung around, flushing. She stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide, face pale. I was just," he stammered. "Your door I heard. I thought maybe someone was hurt. I'm sorry, Miss Cora. I didn't mean no harm. I just—" "Get out," Cora said. Her voice was low, shaking. Tom backed toward the door. "Yes, ma'am, I'll go. Now." He fled, nearly tripping over the pump buckets in his haste. He didn't stop until he was back in his own yard, breathless, the stench still in his nostrils. His mother called something from the porch. He muttered an answer and hurried inside, closing the door behind him. That night over supper, Tom's tongue, loosened by fear and the thrill of forbidden discovery, wagged more than it should have. He told his parents about the smell, about the plate at the wall, about the dark drip. Mrs. Haggerty crossed herself. "Lord have mercy," she muttered. "You stay away from that house, Thomas. You hear me? There's bad airs in there." Mr. Haggerty's eyes, roomy but shrewd, narrowed. "Bad airs or bad doings," he said. "Reverend Monroe gone all this time, girls looking peaky. That oldest one with a stare like she's carrying a sack of stones on her soul. Something's off." By Sunday, the whole of Hollow Creek was buzzing. They didn't confront the sisters outright at first. This was the 1880s, and even in a place as small as Hollow Creek, appearances still mattered. But eyes followed Lydia more closely as she walked down the street. Whispered conversations stopped when Cora entered the general store. Children who had once shyly admired Mary's ribbons now crossed the road to avoid her. That afternoon, the town council met in the back of the general store. 12 men around a rough table: farmers, the blacksmith, the doctor, the mayor. Mr. Haggerty. Tom, banished to the front of the store to stack flour sacks, strained his ears. "We owe it to ourselves to clear the air," Mayor Caldwell said, dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief. "The Reverend was a pillar of this town. His absence is felt." Dr. Phelps folded his hands. "I for one find it troubling that I have not been consulted if he is indeed ill." "He ain't ill," Mr. Haggerty grunted. "He's dead or gone, and those girls are hiding it. The boy saw what he saw." Murmurs. Now, the mayor said. "We can't go storming into a respectable home on the word of a half-grown lad and some bad smell. We must proceed properly." In the end, propriety bowed to curiosity and unease. They agreed. The sheriff, such as he was in a town that barely needed one, would pay a friendly call to the Monroe sisters the next day. He would offer help, inquire after Elias, and report back. The sheriff, Abel Ross, was not a complicated man. He was tall, with a belly just starting to swell over his belt, and eyes that preferred to look at the horizon rather than into men's hearts. He did not relish conflict. He walked up the Monroe Lane in the late afternoon sun, hat in hand, whistling tunelessly to calm his own nerves. The house loomed ahead, its windows like watchful eyes. Lydia answered his knock. She had flour on her hands and a streak of something, ash perhaps, on her cheek. "Sheriff Ross," she said, managing a small, practiced smile. "What brings you to our door?" He cleared his throat. "Miss Monroe, Miss Lydia, fine day." "Hot," she said, "as July always is." He twisted his hat. "May I come in?" Her eyes flicked past him to where he knew the Haggerty's upstairs curtain was twitching. The whole town was watching. "Of course," she said. The parlor smelled faintly of boiled herbs and lye. The windows were open, curtains fluttering weakly. Abel stepped in, hat clutched like a shield. How have you ladies been?" he asked. "As well as can be," Lydia said. "The farm keeps us busy." Cora appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands. "Sheriff," she said, nodding. "Miss Cora." He cleared his throat again. "I'll get right to it. Folks are concerned about your father." Lydia's shoulders stiffened. "We have told folks," she said. "He is away, church business." "Yes, well," Abel tried for a gentle tone. "It's been a powerful long piece of church business, and Dr. Phelps says he ain't had word, nor the mail coach." He shifted his weight. "People worry, you understand." Cora's knuckles whitened on the cloth in her hands. Lydia's jaw clenched. "Our father is where he needs to be," Lydia said. "We manage here," Abel sighed. He had hoped this would be simple. "Lydia," he said, dropping the formal tone, "I'm not here to make trouble, but there's talk of smells, of strange goings-on. If your father has taken ill or if something has happened to him, we can help. But if you hide it," he let the sentence hang. Lydia's eyes, those hard Monroe eyes, met his. For a moment he thought she might slam the door in his face. Then something inside her seemed to crumple just slightly. "You want to see for yourself," she said. Abel nodded. Cora made a small, strangled noise. Lydia's head turned, a quick warning movement, then she stepped aside. "Very well," she said. "Come in." He followed her into the parlor. The air was thick under the herbs. Beneath the sharp tang of sage, something sweeter and fouler lurked, like a secret trying to rise. Lydia gestured vaguely. "As you can see, nothing is." Abel's gaze snagged on the odd patch of wall. He didn't know much about architecture, but he knew what old plaster looked like and what new plaster looked like. That section, slightly uneven, unpainted, did not match the rest. It was as if the wall had grown a tumor. He stepped closer without quite meaning to. The smell intensified. His stomach rolled. "Sheriff," Lydia said sharply, "there is nothing in there for you." He crouched, squinting. There, a faint line along the baseboard, a crack. "Miss Lydia," he said slowly, "I'm going to have to ask you to step back." She didn't move. "Abel," she said quietly, "don't." His hand went to the little hammer hanging from his belt. "I'm sorry." He stood, swung. The hammer had struck the plaster with a dull thud. A small puff of dust and powder fell, coating his boots. Cora gasped. Lydia flinched as if he'd hit her instead. "Stop," she hissed. "You don't know." He swung again and again. The plaster cracked, a spiderweb of fine lines racing outward. On the fourth blow, a fist-sized chunk broke free and fell. With it came a gust of air so thick with decay that Abel staggered, coughing, eyes watering. Behind him, Cora made a choked sound. Lydia stood very straight, hands fists at her sides. Abel pressed the back of his hand to his nose and peered into the hole. Darkness greeted him. Then, as his eyes adjusted shapes, a narrow space, no more than 3 feet wide, running the length of the wall, dirt floor, brick on the far side, and in the middle, slumped against the inner wall, knees drawn up to his chest, was what had once been a man. Skin stretched tight over bone, tattered clothes hanging in loose folds. The skull lolled to one side, jaw slack. In the dim light, Abel saw the hollow sockets where eyes had been. One bony hand was pressed against the ragged hole, fingers curled as if they had died mid-scratch. Beside him on the floor lay a tin plate, its last offering dried to a hard, greenish smear. Someone screamed. It might have been Cora, it might have been Abel himself. Behind them from the hallway, Mary's voice rose in a shrill, keening wail. Abel stumbled back, one hand scrabbling for the doorframe. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it. "Sweet, merciful God," he gasped. Lydia did not scream. She did not faint. She simply looked at the hole, at the hand that had fed and beaten her in equal measure, now reduced to so much parchment and bone. In her eyes something went dark and still. The rest unfolded the way such things always did in small, frightened places. Within an hour, half the town was on the Monroe lawn. Men with shirt sleeves rolled up, women with aprons still dusted in flour, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts. They watched as the sheriff and the doctor and 4 of the brawnier farmers tore down the rest of the false wall, the stench of death rolling over them like a physical blow. Dr. Phelps, handkerchief pressed to his face, crouched beside the corpse. "Been dead months," he said through the cloth. "Maybe longer, hard to say with the conditions, but not recent. No, not recent at all." Abel straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the 3 sisters, huddled together on the porch steps. Mary was sobbing openly, her face buried in her hands. Cora stared, unseeing, rocking slightly, a low, broken sound slipping from her throat. Lydia sat very still, back straight, gaze fixed on the men hauling her father's remains from the cavity. "Miss Lydia Monroe," Abel said, voice formal now, loud enough to carry, "you and your sisters are under arrest for the unlawful imprisonment and murder of Reverend Elias Monroe." The crowd murmured, a low, hungry sound. Some faces showed horror. Some showed a grim, ugly satisfaction. The great man had fallen. There was blood in the water. Lydia blinked once. "Unlawful," she repeated softly. "Strange how that word only ever seems to apply to some of us." Abel flushed. "Lydia, don't make this harder than it has to be." Her mouth twitched. "Sheriff, I'd say we passed hard the night we carried him down the attic stairs. They took them in separate wagons. Mary muttering prayers to the small room behind the sheriff's office. Cora, white as milk and mumbling half-remembered hymns to the same. Lydia, chin high, back unbent, walked under her own power, hands tied loosely in front of her. The trial that fall drew folks from 3 counties. Reporters came from Little Rock and even as far as St. Louis, fascinated by the story of the Monroe sisters, 2 devils in petticoats, as one lurid broadsheet put it, who had dared to turn their father's own house into his tomb. The prosecutor painted Elias as a saint, a tireless shepherd of souls. He painted his daughters as vipers, consumed with hatred and greed, hungry for his land and his money. The defense, such as it was, provided by a nervous young lawyer Lydia barely knew, murmured something about female hysteria and temporary madness. Lydia watched it all with a kind of detached clarity. She listened as neighbors she had known her whole life testified to her father's goodness and her own strange, hard ways. She listened as Dr. Phelps described the state of Elias' body, the marks on the wall that suggested weeks, if not months, of scratching. She listened as Sheriff Ross, eyes troubled, recounted the discovery. They did not ask about the bruise on her cheek that had bloomed the night of the attic. They did not ask about the scar on Cora's back. They did not ask why Mary flinched whenever a man raised his voice. When Lydia took the stand, the courtroom leaned in. "Miss Monroe," the prosecutor said, smoothing his mustache, "did you lay the bricks in that wall yourself?" "Yes," she said. "Did you on multiple occasions feed your father through that crack knowing he was imprisoned there?" "Yes." "Did you at any point attempt to summon medical assistance for him?" "No." "Did you in fact tell your sisters that this arrangement," he made the word sound filthy, "was your idea?" "Yes." Her voice did not waver. "And do you now under oath express remorse for your actions?" Cora, watching from the defense table, squeezed her hands together. Mary, her mind fraying bit by bit, stared unfocused at the ceiling. Lydia thought of remorse, of nights kneeling by the crack, listening to her father's labored breath, of waking in the small hours, certain she could feel his hand still around their lives, of the day the smell began. She thought of her mother's face, gray with fever, of her sister's bruises, of the attic. "I express remorse," she said slowly, "for a great many things." The prosecutor smiled thinly. "But for this, for sealing your father into a wall and feeding him like a rat." Lydia lifted her chin. "I express remorse," she said, "that the world you and my father built is such that a woman must become a jailer to avoid being a victim her whole life. I express remorse that there was no sheriff at my door the night he raised a hand to us. I express remorse that you only call it a crime when a man is in the walls and not when he builds them around his family." A rustle swept the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. "Miss Monroe, you will answer the question put to you." Lydia's gaze met his. "Then no," she said. "I do not repent what I did, only that it had to be done at all." They found her guilty, of course, all three of them. Mary was deemed not of sound mind and sent to an asylum 2 counties over, a place of cold baths and locked doors. Cora, for her lesser role, was sentenced to life imprisonment, though she would not live out even 10 years before sickness or sorrow took her. Lydia was sentenced to hang. On the morning of her execution, the sky over Hollow Creek was a hard, bright blue. People gathered, some out of morbid curiosity, some because there was little else to do on a Saturday. The gallows, hastily erected at the edge of town, creaked in the light breeze. Abel Ross stood by the steps, hat in hand, face ashen. He had aged years and months. Lydia walked up those steps without stumbling. She wore a plain gray dress. Her hair was braided neatly down her back. She looked, some said later, more like a schoolteacher going to class than a woman going to her death. When asked for last words, she paused, eyes scanning the crowd. She saw Mrs. Haggerty clutching her son's arm. She saw Dr. Phelps mouth a thin line. She saw men who had nodded to her father for years look anywhere but at her. "I have been told," she said, voice clear, "that God will judge me when I leave this world. I believe that. I welcome it. For it seems to me that every man who has judged me in this town was once a boy who learned at my father's knee what power looks like. You built your houses with walls only men could pass through. I pushed back at one of them, and now you call me monster." A murmur. The hangman shifted. "I fed my father through a crack in the wall," she went on, "because that was the only crack I could find in the prison he built around us. If you wish to sleep easy after today, tell yourselves you killed a creature more wicked than the man you buried in your churchyard. But remember this, the first stone of that wall was not mine. It was yours. It was every time you looked away." She closed her eyes then, perhaps seeing the attic or the pantry or some place beyond all of it. The hood came down. The rope creaked. When they buried her in a small, unmarked grave away from the Monroe family plot, few attended. Rain began to fall, soft and steady, soaking the fresh-turned earth. Years went by. The house on the hill fell into disrepair. Children grew up hearing stories of the Monroe sisters, of the father in the wall, of the smell that clung to the place long after the wind should have carried it away. Some said you could still hear scratching if you put your ear to the parlor wall. Others said it wasn't scratching at all, but the faint clink of a plate, sliding toward a crack that no longer existed. The truth, as always, lived in the spaces between what people were willing to say out loud. The lesson, buried beneath the bricks and the gossip and the sermons, waited for anyone who cared to find it. Moral: when a house is built on fear and silence, every wall is a prison, and those who finally push back are remembered not for the chains they broke but for the bricks they laid. Before you condemn the hands that fed a man through a crack in the wall, ask why no one ever asked what he'd done to make his own children choose the darkness over his shadow.